There are moments in history when a single document changes everything. When a filing cabinet is cracked open, when a bureaucratic error exposes what powerful institutions desperately wanted buried, and suddenly the world looks fundamentally different than it did the day before. That is exactly what happened in 1977, when the United States government was forced to confront one of the darkest chapters in its own intelligence history. The Central Intelligence Agency had been running a covert program so disturbing, so morally catastrophic, that even seasoned government officials struggled to process what they were reading. The program was called MK-Ultra, and the files that survived its deliberate destruction rewrote what Americans understood about their own government, about the limits of power, and about what human beings are capable of doing to one another in the name of national security. The story begins not in 1977, but decades earlier, in the shadow of the Second World War, when American intelligence officers were watching something terrifying unfold behind the Iron Curtain. Soviet and Chinese interrogators appeared to be doing the impossible. They were breaking prisoners completely, extracting confessions, rewriting personalities, turning loyal soldiers into hollow shells who would say anything their captors wanted. American officials were convinced that the communists had discovered some form of mind control, some chemical or psychological weapon that could erase a person's will entirely. That fear, whether justified or paranoid, became the seed from which MK-Ultra would grow. In April of 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles formally authorized the program that would become MK-Ultra. It was built on the foundation of an earlier project called Artichoke, which itself had grown from a program called Bluebird. Each iteration pushed further into territory that no ethical framework could justify. MK-Ultra was different in scale and ambition. It was not a single experiment or a contained research initiative. It was an umbrella program that eventually encompassed 150 separate research projects, funded through front organizations and conducted at universities, hospitals, prisons, and military facilities across the United States and Canada. The scientists and researchers involved were not fringe figures operating in secret basements. Many were respected academics, medical professionals, and psychiatrists who believed, or at least told themselves, that they were serving a greater purpose. The program was overseen by a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, a man who would later be described as the CIA's own version of a mad scientist, though that characterization perhaps lets him off too easily. Gottlieb was methodical, intelligent, and deeply committed to the idea that the ends justified the means. Under his direction, MK-Ultra researchers explored hypnosis, electroconvulsive therapy, sensory deprivation, psychological manipulation, and most infamously, the use of lysergic acid diethylamide, better known as LSD. The agency had become fascinated with LSD after learning about its extraordinary psychological effects, and Gottlieb believed it might be the key to unlocking the mind control capabilities they were chasing. What followed was a systematic violation of human beings on a scale that is still difficult to fully comprehend. Subjects were given LSD without their knowledge or consent. This included prisoners, mental patients, drug addicts, and sex workers, people who were considered expendable by the program's architects, people who had no power to refuse or resist. But the program did not stop there. CIA officers also dosed their own colleagues, sometimes without warning, to observe reactions in real-world settings. One of the most haunting cases involved a man named Frank Olson, a government biochemist who was secretly given LSD at a retreat in Maryland in November of 1953. 9 days later, Olson fell from a window on the 13th floor of a New York hotel and died. For more than 2 decades, his death was ruled a suicide. It was only after the MK-Ultra files began to surface that his family learned the truth about what had happened to him in the days before his death, and questions about whether his fall was truly voluntary have never been fully resolved. Beyond LSD, researchers experimented with other drugs including heroin, mescaline, barbiturates, and amphetamines. They studied the effects of extreme sleep deprivation, prolonged isolation, and relentless psychological pressure. In Canada, a psychiatrist named Donald Ewan Cameron conducted experiments at McGill University that were funded in part through CIA front organizations. Cameron believed he could erase mental illness by wiping a patient's mind clean and rebuilding their personality from scratch. He called this process psychic driving. Patients were subjected to drug-induced sleep for weeks or months at a time, bombarded with recorded messages played on loop, and given electroconvulsive therapy at voltages far beyond any accepted medical standard. Many of his patients never fully recovered. They lost memories, lost years of their lives, lost the ability to function as the people they had been before they walked into his care. By the early 1970s, the political climate in the United States had shifted dramatically. The Vietnam War had eroded public trust in government institutions. Watergate had exposed the willingness of those in power to lie, manipulate, and destroy evidence. In this environment, CIA Director Richard Helms made a decision that speaks volumes about what the agency knew it had done. In January of 1973, Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra files. Thousands of documents were shredded, an act of institutional self-preservation that was also an act of profound contempt for accountability and truth. What Helms did not know was that a collection of approximately 20,000 documents had been misfiled in a financial records building in Warrenton, Virginia, and had escaped the purge entirely. These documents were discovered in 1977 during a Freedom of Information Act search requested by journalist John Marks. Their existence triggered Senate hearings that summer, during which Senator Ted Kennedy led an investigation into what the CIA had been doing for nearly 2 decades. The hearings were extraordinary. Former CIA officials sat before Congress and described a program that had operated with almost no oversight, no ethical review, and no accountability. The testimony confirmed that American citizens had been used as unwitting test subjects, that deaths had occurred, that the agency had funded torture under the banner of scientific research. The public response was one of genuine shock, though perhaps it should not have been. The capacity of powerful institutions to rationalize cruelty is not a new phenomenon in human history. The Senate hearings resulted in new oversight mechanisms for the intelligence community, including the establishment of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. The CIA issued formal acknowledgments of wrongdoing, and some victims and their families eventually received financial settlements, though no amount of money could undo what had been done to them. Frank Olson's family exhumed his body in 1994, and a forensic examination suggested his injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall, reigniting questions that remain unanswered to this day. The Canadian government eventually paid compensation to some of Cameron's surviving patients, acknowledging the role that American funding had played in their suffering. But the legacy of MKUltra extends beyond the specific harm done to specific individuals. It fundamentally altered the relationship between American citizens and their government. It demonstrated that the machinery of the state, when operating in secrecy and without accountability, is capable of treating human beings as raw material for experimentation. It showed that respected institutions, universities, hospitals, and intelligence agencies can become instruments of profound cruelty when oversight is removed and ideology fills the vacuum. The declassified files did not just reveal a program, they revealed a way of thinking, a willingness to suspend moral judgment in the name of strategic necessity that did not begin with MKUltra and did not end with it either. What those surviving documents ultimately teach us is not simply a lesson about the past. They are a warning about the conditions under which ordinary institutions and ordinary people become capable of extraordinary harm. The files exist now, available in archives, studied by historians, cited in legal cases, and referenced in policy debates. They are uncomfortable to read, not because they describe something alien, but because they describe something entirely human, the capacity to cause suffering while believing or pretending to believe that it serves a higher purpose. That is the true weight of what was declassified, not just secrets, but a mirror held up to the face of power itself.